Why did you come to church today? Now, I said it at 8 o'clock, and I'm going to say it again. Ken and Juliana, please do not tell the bishop that I'm encouraging people not to come to church on Sunday. And don't get me wrong, I am not suggesting that you shouldn't come to church or that there are many other better things to do on a Sunday morning. But I am curious why you get up every Sunday morning and choose to come to church. Is it out of a sense of obligation or habit? Maybe you come to church because you enjoy worship and you enjoy the music and the chance to see friends. Hopefully, part of the reason that you make this choice to come to church is that you get something out of it, something that's meaningful, that draws you closer to God and to one another. In Jesus' day, going to the synagogue on the Sabbath was a customary and expected practice. It was a vital part of one's religious and communal life. And the commandment to keep the Sabbath or rightly observe all the rules and customs surrounding the Sabbath was incredibly important. And in today's gospel, Jesus broke this central commandment when he healed the woman in the synagogue. And if that is not shocking enough, I want you to recall that in today's passage from Luke, this is the fourth time in the Gospel of Luke alone that Jesus and the disciples get themselves into trouble for breaking or keeping the Sabbath. In today's story, Jesus was teaching in the synagogue on the Sabbath when he noticed this woman who had been so physically disabled that she had become completely bent over, unable to stand up straight. And notice that the woman does not approach Jesus and ask to be healed. She is just coming to the synagogue because she is observing the Sabbath in the right way. But it's Jesus who sees this woman and calls her over and says to her, "Woman, you are set free from your ailments." And then he lays his hands on her, and the gospel tells us that immediately she stood up straight and she began praising God. But meanwhile, in the story, the leader of the synagogue, he's watching all of this and he's quite outraged. Because in his mind, Jesus' action of healing this woman was considered a type of work that was forbidden on the Sabbath. And in breaking the Sabbath, Jesus was in serious violation. It's important to remember and to understand that Sabbath observance was no small thing in Jesus' day. There were strict prohibitions governing this day of rest and worship. Things like injunctions about going out and gathering food. If you're going to eat on the Sabbath, you best prepare it before the Sabbath because you can't go out. No going to McDonald's on the Sabbath. You couldn't light fires. You couldn't sell goods. And you had to refrain from any and all types of work. And believe me when I tell you, if you wanted to know what constituted work, it depended who you asked, where you were, and they would give you the manual, and there would be like 40 different things that were considered work. And disregarding the Sabbath was a major offense that carried serious consequences. In fact, the Sabbath was so deeply interwoven in Jewish culture and identity, and it was so important to their understanding of their covenant with God, that the observance of the Sabbath made it into the top tier of the Ten Commandments. It's number 4, depending on which source you're looking at. Sometimes it's number 3. It's way up there of importance. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy, God says. So what's going on here? Why does Jesus, a faithful Jewish person who respected and protected the traditions and the practices and the laws of his faith, why does he seem to have an appetite not to keep the Sabbath or to observe it properly? Why is he always getting in trouble for the same thing? The practice of observing the Sabbath is incredibly old. It has its roots in the story of creation found in the book of Genesis. It's also in the book of Exodus, when the commandment to keep and preserve the Sabbath was given to Moses on Mount Sinai. And you know, because we're human beings, ever since this commandment was given, there have been and still are varying degrees of interpretation about exactly what observing the Sabbath is, or what keeping the Sabbath holy actually means. So, some biblical scholars came to this passage from Luke, and they speculate that it's about this debate between the strict adherence or the letter of the law, as we find in the leader of the synagogue, compared with the spirit of the law, as we find in Jesus' emphasis on mercy and compassion for this woman. And while there are some good lessons to be learned about the differences between the spirit of the law and the letter of the law, I wonder if this passage is asking us to consider something different. I wonder if the passage in Jesus is asking us to look more closely about the significance and the weight of Sabbath itself and what it might hold for us in our faith today. In the book of Exodus and in the book of Deuteronomy, there are two related biblical traditions about the Sabbath. Two different but related traditions about the Sabbath. The one found in the book of Exodus links the Sabbath observance with the story of creation. It says, "For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. And therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it." According to this tradition, the Sabbath is a reminder of God's gift of rest and respite from our toils, and that we should respect all creation as something sacred. The second tradition, found in the book of Deuteronomy, links Sabbath with the story of the Exodus. It says, "Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. And therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day." Remember, God brought you out. God delivered you. God rescued you. God saved you. And therefore, you are to keep this commandment of Sabbath. According to this tradition, the Sabbath is a reminder of our deliverance from captivity, our release from bondage. And what is most significant, not only about the commandment to keep the Sabbath, but all of the laws and the commandments, is that they were given to the Israelites after the Exodus. They were given after their departure from Egypt, after God delivered them and rescued them and set them free from the harsh and bitter captivity of the Egyptians. This commandment came after their liberation and freedom from oppression, and after they were restored and given new life. It was after all of this, when God rescued and saved them, that they were given a commandment to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And why that's significant is because God's commandment to remember the Sabbath is born out of God's great act to rescue and save us. We remember and we keep holy this day so that we will never forget God's saving act. We remember and keep sacred this day so that we will always carry in the forefront of our minds and in our hearts that God sees us when we are suffering and will intervene to set us free, so that we can be the people God has called us to be. Maybe this is what Jesus was up to in today's gospel, reminding us that God has and always will rescue and heal and save us from everything that could ever limit or diminish or hold us back. Look at the story again. The woman who is trapped in her own body, constricted, bent over for 18 long years, was set free. She was liberated from her bondage. She was renewed and restored and given new life, and she stood up straight on the Sabbath. Our day of rest and worship isn't a commandment for God's sake. It is a commandment for our own sake. For us, for all of us who need rest and release and renewal and recreation. Where do you feel trapped and constricted in your life? What are the things that cause you to double over? What feels unfair, excessive, burdensome in your life today? What holds you back or holds you down from living the kind of life that you desire? What would liberation and restoration and deliverance look like for you? I think it would be mistaken if we came away from today thinking about this gift of Sabbath, this gift of healing and restoration, this gift of remembering that we are sacred in God's eyes. I think it would be a shame if we walked away today and thought, well, that's only reserved for one day a week. What do you think would be possible in this world if we, all of us in this room, carried a spirit of Sabbath into everything we did every single day of our lives? What would the world look like then? Keeping the Sabbath holy means more than refraining from a list of thou shalt nots. Keeping the Sabbath holy is about remembering that God has delivered you and that God has caused you to stand up straight. Amen.